And we have meetings like once in government state, you have a day about when they are. Yes, from the remote hire. So, yeah. Mark Stewart.
Hello.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Kristen, how you doing?
I'm doing
Hey.
well. How are you?
Good. Were you the first to join?
I think so.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go back on mute.
Hey, Kristen and Tim, this is Susan, and I'm in here too.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. I will share my screen with you here. All of the slides will be sent to everybody after the presentation. Can everybody see the slides okay? All right, thanks for all the thumbs up. All right, so we're here today to do our public assistance applicant briefing phase 1. There will be 2 additional phases after this presentation once RPAs are submitted, and I will talk about those a little bit later. Just as an introduction, my name is Ashley Middleton. I lead our field delivery team, which focuses on from when the disaster hits all the way through project obligation. And our state representatives will be Scott in District 6, Teresa in District 5, and Makaria in District 2. So if you do you have any questions after the presentation or throughout the process, these will be your contacts. You can reach out to me or any of them, and we'll be here to support you. Our overall goal today is to go over public assistance, some of the requirements in the program, the overall process, how to apply. This event is Disaster 4732, covering the Mississippi flood. The incident dates are April 24th, 2023 through May 13th, 2023. Our declaration date was August 25th, 2023, and your request for public assistance deadline is September 24th, 2023. The incident covers Alameda, Clayton, Dubuque, Jackson, Scott, Des Moines, and Lee County. FEMA's Public Assistance Program provides grants to assist communities to respond and recover from major disaster or emergencies. Generally, the funding is 75% federal share, 10% state share, and 15% local share. In flood events, the county or city is required to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. Otherwise, that city or county is responsible for the full 25% share. The first step in the PA process is to submit a request for public assistance, also known as an RPA. The purpose of the RPA is to verify your eligibility as an applicant in this specific event. Our deadline for this is September 24th, 2023. This can be done in our EM grants system, which is our Homeland Security granting system here in Iowa, and a tutorial on how to complete your RPA and register can be found on our website. When completing the RPA, you'll need to verify your organization's information such as legal name, UEI, FEIN number, organization type, address. You'll need to identify a primary, alternate, and authorized contact. And your authorized contact should be someone who is authorized to sign legal documents and/or agreements on behalf of your organization. Even if you're not sure if you'll have eligible damages or if you'll be an eligible applicant, maybe you think you might be getting insurance proceeds at some point, we really encourage you to just submit your RPA, because once we pass that September 24th deadline, it'll be really difficult to, it really will be impossible to get you into the public assistance program. We can always withdraw you later, but we encourage that you at least apply for your RPA. Some key references and resources for you throughout this process. The Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, also known as the PAPA-G, includes detailed guidance on the program requirements, including work, facility, cost, eligibility. The current version is version 4. The PA program is authorized and governed by the Stafford Act, and PA-specific regulations are found at 44 CFR 206. Uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards can be found in 2 CFR 200. We also have a dedicated page on our website for the PA program. There you can find additional resources and information for Iowa disaster declarations. EM Grants is HSEMD's grant management system, and FEMA has a separate system called Grants Portal. You'll start the process in our system, EM Grants, with submitting an RPA. Documenting damage, scoping, costing, and final reviews for projects will happen in FEMA System Grants Portal. And then once your project's obligated, managing the grant, including any amendments, report, closeout activities, will occur in our system, EM Grants. The 4 basic components of public assistance eligibility are the applicant, facility, work, and cost, and FEMA refers to these as the eligibility pyramid. An applicant must be a state, territory, tribe, local government, or private nonprofit organization. Only certain PMPs are eligible applicants. To be eligible, a PMP must own or operate a facility that provides an eligible service. Chapter 3 of the PAPA-G has additional guidance on eligible critical and eligible non-critical essential social services for PMPs. A facility is a building, system, equipment built or manufactured or an improved and maintained natural feature. An example is a water distribution system. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and other systems that are components of a facility in which they operate are considered part of the facility. To be eligible, a facility must have damage as a result of the disaster, be located within a declared area, be the legal responsibility of an eligible applicant, and not be under the authority of another federal agency. Additional guidance on eligible facilities can be found in Chapter 4 of the PAPA-G. Work is categorized as either emergency or permanent. It must be required as a result of the declared incident, located within the designated disaster area, and the legal responsibility of the applicant. Emergency work must be completed within 6 months from the declaration date, and permanent work within 18 months of the declaration date. If a project needs additional time, applicants must submit an extension request in writing to HSEMD after your project has been obligated. Additional guidance on eligibility and requirements for each category of work can be found in Chapters 7 and 8 of the PAPA-G. Let's take a closer look at emergency work, Category A and B. Emergency work is only eligible if the work addresses an immediate threat. FEMA defines an immediate threat as the threat of imminent danger, additional damage, or destruction reasonably expected to occur within 5 years. Category A is for debris removal. The deadline to complete this work is 6 months after the declaration date. Debris includes, but is not limited to, vegetative debris, construction and demolition debris, sand, mud, silt, gravel, boulders, white goods, and vehicle or vessel wreckage. As you work to gather information for this project, you need to be prepared to provide estimates of debris quantity, photographs, location of the debris, location of temporary reduction sites and permanent disposal sites, copies of permits, quantities of debris removed, reduced, disposed, and recycled with load tickets, and documentation of legal responsibility and immediate threat. Additional guidance on debris removal can be found in Chapter 7 of the POPG. Category B is the emergency protective measures. The deadline is also 6 months after the declaration date. For our Mississippi flood disaster, this includes things like putting up pesco barriers, sandbagging, any of that preparedness stuff done prior to the Mississippi flood that helped also mitigate the flood. Additional information on emergency protective measures and specific requirements can be found in Chapter 7 of the POPG. Permanent work is category C through G, and it's work required to restore a facility to its pre-disaster design, size and capacity, and function in accordance with applicable codes and standards. Emergency repair or stabilization to eliminate or lessen an immediate threat is emergency work. All permanent work is subject to the eligibility of the facility, as we discussed regarding public assistance eligibility pyramid. So what does this really mean? Let's look at some definitions and examples. Pre-disaster design means the size or capacity of a facility as originally constructed or is subsequently modified. It does not mean the capacity at which the applicant was using the facility at the time of the incident, if different from the most recent designed capacity. For example, if a school is designed for a capacity of 100 students and is damaged beyond repair, the eligible funding for the replacement facility is limited to the necessary for 100 students, even if more than 100 students were attending the school prior to the incident. Pre-disaster function is the function for which the facility was originally designed or subsequently modified. For example, if the applicant designed and constructed an administrative building, but later altered it in accordance with applicable construction codes and standards to use it as a school, the pre-disaster function would be as a school. If the facility was serving an alternate function at the time of the incident, but was now altered to provide that function, FEMA provides PA funding to restore the facility either to the original pre-disaster function or pre-disaster alternate function, whichever costs less. An example of this is if an applicant is using an office building as a storage facility at the time of an incident, it's less costly to restore the facility to a storage facility. Only the repairs necessary to restore it as that would be eligible. Special lighting, wall or floor finishes typical of an office building are not necessary for a storage facility and would not be eligible. Additional guidance on permanent work can be found in Chapter 8 of the POPG. Cost is the funding tied directly to eligible work and must be adequately documented, authorized, necessary, and reasonable. Costs must comply with the uniform guidance and the cost principles located in 2 CFR 200. Eligible costs include labor, equipment, materials, contract work, as well as direct and indirect administrative costs. Be prepared to provide documentation to support the costs, including invoices, receipts, proof of payment, documentation of procurement, timesheets, payroll reports, and any applicable policies. Additional information on cost eligibility can be found in Chapter 6 of the POPG. FEMA refers to applicant personnel as force account. FEMA reimburses force account labor based on actual hourly rates plus the cost of the employee's actual fringe benefits. FEMA's criteria for reimbursing straight time labor costs differ depending on the type of employee and whether it is emergency work or permanent work. For permanent work, both straight time and overtime labor costs are eligible for budgeted and unbudgeted employees. For emergency work, generally only overtime is eligible for budgeted employees. For unbudgeted employees, straight time and overtime may be eligible. Category A emergency work does have an exception where applicants can elect to participate in the alternate procedures for debris removal and receive reimbursement for straight time for budgeted employees for debris removal activities. Labor costs must be supported by the time and effort reporting for each individual. This documentation should include 100% of the hours worked during the period claimed, not just hours for public assistance projects. It should also delineate time spent on each federal and non-federal activity. You'll need to be prepared to provide payroll documentation along with your payroll accounting policies. Additional information on force account labor can be found in Chapter 6 of the PAPG. And I'll also send some tools and resources for this with the slides after this presentation. FEMA provides PA funding for the use of applicant-owned equipment, also known as force account equipment, based on hourly rates. For vehicles, FEMA may provide funding based on mileage if it is documented and less costly than hourly rates. If an applicant does not have sufficient equipment, FEMA may provide funding for both the purchase price and either the use of the equipment based on hourly rates or actual fuel and maintenance cost. FEMA publishes national equipment rates based on all costs associated with ownership and operation except labor. This includes depreciation and maintenance. If you're not using FEMA's rates, you'll want to be prepared to provide a justification and documentation to support your local or state rate. FEMA also provides funding for rented leased equipment based on the term of the lease. You may need to demonstrate that leasing was more cost-effective than purchasing equipment. Additional information on this can be found in Chapter 6 of the PAPG, and I will also email the most recent cost codes and an equipment tracking tool after our presentation. State government applicants must follow the same policies and procedures they would use for procurements with non-federal funds, comply with 2 CFR 200.322, procurement of recovered materials, and ensure that every purchase order or other contract includes any clauses required by 2 CFR 200.326 contract provisions. Non-state applicants, tribal and local governments, and PMPs must use their own written procurement procedures that reflect applicable state, tribal, and local government laws and regulations, provided that the procurements conform to applicable federal law and standards. This requirement applies to tribal governments even when the tribe is a recipient. Generally, if you have a conflict between rules, follow the more restrictive rule. Federal procurement requirements are outlined in the 2 CFR 200.317 to 327. Additional resource guidance and training can be found on FEMA's website. We encourage you to take the time to review your written procurement policies and procedures. Documentation for this is key because procurement noncompliance can jeopardize your PA funding. Our phase 2 of applicant briefings will cover procurement and our funding agreement as well, so you'll get some more information then. In an emergency or exigent situation, FEMA may reimburse costs incurred under a contract procured through a non-competitive proposal, also known as sole source. Many disaster recovery projects funded under the PA program do not meet FEMA's definition of emergency or exigency. It is important to document your justification and describe the emergency or exigency circumstance in your procurement records. Let's look at some definitions and 2 scenarios. Emergency is defined as the existence of a threat to life, public health, or safety, or improved property requiring immediate action to alleviate that threat. In our example here, there's severe weather impacting a city that causes widespread damage, including loss of life, widespread flooding, loss of power, damage to public and private structures, and millions of cubic yards of debris across the city. The city needs to begin to remove this debris to restore access to the community and support search and rescue and power restoration. So this is an example of when a community can use emergency procurement and contracting to support debris cleanup. Exigency is defined as the existence of a need to avoid, prevent, or alleviate serious harm or injury, financial or otherwise, to the applicant. In our example here, a tornado impacts a city in June, causing widespread damage, including damage to a school. The school begins the new year in September. Awarding a contract and using a sealed bidding process would require at least 90 days and then an additional 60 to repair the school. This is an example of, because of the need to open the school in a timely manner, this school can use a sole source with a contractor and have the school prepared without going through a full bidding process. FEMA is legally prohibited from duplicating benefits from other sources. If another applicant receives funding from another source for the same work, FEMA reduces the eligible costs to prevent a duplication of benefits. Some of these examples include insurance proceeds, non-federal grants or cash donations, third-party liability, other federal awards, and other FEMA funding, including individual assistance, or HMGP. FEMA will reduce eligible project costs for facilities that are insured by the actual or anticipated insurance proceeds. If an uninsured facility was damaged by flooding and is located within a special flood hazard area, FEMA will reduce the eligible amount by the maximum amount of insurance proceeds that could have been obtained from a standard NFIP policy or the value of the facility, whichever is less. On permanent work projects, applicants must obtain and maintain reasonable insurance to protect facilities against future loss. This is not required if the damage to the facility is less than $5,000. Additional guidance on duplication of benefits and insurance can be found in Chapter 6 of the PAPAG. Category Z management costs refer to grant management and administrative costs, not project management activities for specific projects. For subrecipients, FEMA provides public assistance funding for actual costs incurred up to 5% of the subrecipient's total award amount. Examples of work activities may include attending an applicant briefing, going to any FEMA meetings, participating in a site inspection, gathering detailed damage descriptions, preparing any reports, requesting PA funds. We encourage you to start tracking this now. And we'll also provide a tool to help you track this after this presentation. So how does this all work? The general life cycle of a disaster recovery for the PA program is organized into phases. After a presidential declaration, the state coordinates applicant briefings. Within 30 days of the declaration, interested applicants must submit a request for public assistance in HSEMD's grant system, EM grants. The state and FEMA then review the RPA to confirm the organization's eligibility as an applicant for the PA program. Once your RPA is approved and your organization has been determined to be an eligible applicant, HSEMD coordinates a pre-award risk assessment. Our staff work with applicants to review agency capacity, policies, and procedures. This includes reviewing written procurement policies and their compliance with federal requirements. The result of the risk assessment informs HSEMD's monitoring activities during the disaster. At this time, HSEMD also initiates the funding agreement, which is completed in EM grants. Funds for obligated projects cannot be released until the funding agreement is complete. Agreements are electronically signed in EM grants. Overall, throughout this process, our intent is to always have an HSEMD staff member available to support and guide the applicant. Our field delivery team will provide one contact from the RPA to obligation of the project. Our grant management and monitoring team will provide one contact to support you from obligation to closeout. Applicants are also assigned to a program delivery manager, also known as a PDMG. Your PDMG will coordinate an exploratory call to get an initial understanding of impacts and discuss requirements and next steps. The call usually is scheduled within 7 working days of the assignment. Within 21 days of the assignment, the PDMG will coordinate a recovery scoping meeting with the applicant. The applicant should ensure staff with knowledge of incident-related damage, emergency activities performed, and related costs attend the meeting. Applicants must identify and report all incident-related impacts to FEMA within 60 days of the recovery scoping meeting. To do this, the applicant will prepare and submit a damage inventory, also known as a DI. As the PDMG and applicant formulate the project, information is entered, uploaded, and updated in FEMA System Grants portal. FEMA gathers project-specific information by conducting the site inspections and obtaining documentation. Damage information is the foundation of the overall project award. The scope of work and cost eligibility is tied to the eligibility of the damage. Once FEMA, HSEMD, and the applicant agree on the damage description and dimensions, projects are then scoped and costed. Documentation is reviewed, and once final reviews are completed, projects are obligated. All the project formulation occurs in FEMA System Grants portal. The federal share of the project becomes available to the recipient at the obligation. The subrecipient payout process is outlined in our admin plan, which can be found on our website. Payout process does depend on the size of the project. The state share is not paid until the project has been closed. After all your projects have been obligated, the PDMG coordinates a recovery transition meeting to transition the applicant from the project development phase to the subaward management phase. Any amendments or extension requests must be submitted in writing to HSEMDs. Consult with your project officer if you have any questions on this. Ongoing subaward management reporting and closeout does occur in HSEMD's system EM grants. And throughout this entire process, you'll always have a state person present at all of your meetings and to support you throughout everything. So you can always reach out to our staff if you have any questions. As I mentioned before, the next step and most important step is to put in your request for public assistance. This is done on our website or on our EM Grants Pro website, and a tutorial on how to do this can be found on our website. After your RPA has been approved, HSEMD initiates the funding agreement in our grants management system. The funding agreement must be signed and completed in order for us to release funds for approved and obligated projects. On the RPA, you will have identified key initial contacts, a primary, alternate, and authorized representative. An authorized representative is the person who's authorized to sign legal documents and/or agreements on behalf of the organization, such as a mayor, county commission chair, city manager. Here on the funding agreement, you'll reconfirm this authorized representative and identify a chief financial officer. Checking the boxes to certify each section and submitting the agreement in the system applies an electronic signature. This must be done by either your authorized representative or chief financial officer in the system in order for their signature to be applied. No other signatures will be accepted. These two contacts will also be responsible for signing several other things throughout the grant formulation phase of the project. And we encourage that the CFO attend our phase 2 applicant briefing, which discusses procurement and the funding agreement a bit further. Federal regulations require that all recipients and subrecipients of federal funds to have a unique entity identifier. This identifier is required prior to award and is used for transparency and reporting of federal funding across all programs. Previously, the DUNS number was used for this purpose. On April 4th, 2022, the federal government transitioned to utilizing a new numbering system generated by SAM.gov. You'll need to provide your entity's SAM.gov UEI number when you apply for public assistance. If you've recently applied for and received funding from HSEMD, we may already have your UEI on file in EM Grants. If you're not sure, you can check on SAM.gov to see if you have a UEI number. And if your entity does not have a UEI assigned, you can request a UEI on SAM.gov. You don't need to do the full registration of your entity because this process can be really lengthy and is not required for subrecipients of federal funding. You'll want to follow instructions on SAM.gov to get a unique entity ID. If you do need to get one of these and you need some support or help to make sure that you request the correct number and don't do the full registration, please reach out to us and we're happy to help you do that. Once the program delivery manager, recipient, and applicant conduct the exploratory call, the applicant begins work on their damage inventory. You'll bring a draft to your recovery scoping meeting, and once finalized, the damage inventory must be submitted within 60 days of the RSM. The damage inventory lays the foundation for all future actions, including project formulation, damage description, dimensions, scope of work, and cost estimates, all which lead to project obligation. You can download an Excel spreadsheet template for the damage inventory from Grants Portal, fill that out, and upload it back into Grants Portal. As the PDMG works with the applicant, they identify sites and facilities that can be combined into one project. Generally, first, things are organized based on categories of work and facility types. Then sites or facilities are identified that should be formulated into separate projects. A project worksheet is formulated for each project. It captures the related pre-disaster damage facility scope of work and costs. Projects must meet the minimum threshold for eligible costs, which for this event is $3,800. FEMA administers funding for large and small projects differently. For large projects that are not capped, FEMA adjusts any estimated costs to the actual incurred amount so that the final funding is based on actuals. Small projects are not adjusted for actuals, and you are only paid out on the estimate. In addition to this, although FEMA does write small projects on estimate, for the state closeout, you will need your actual to receive the state share enclosure project out with us. So although the project may be written on estimates, if it's small, you do need to track every actual dollar spent on this project and be prepared to show that at closeout. Here in Iowa, for small projects, an initial portion of the federal share is paid out on obligation. Applicants submit requests for reimbursement for additional funds, and the state share is dispersed on closeout. For large projects, the federal share becomes available at obligation, and applicants submit requests for reimbursement through the project in our AM Grants Pro system. Section 406, hazard mitigation. Hazard mitigation is any sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate risk to people and property from natural hazards and their effects. FEMA has the authority to provide PA funding for cost-effective hazard mitigation measures for facilities damaged by the incident under Section 406 of the Stafford Act. Additional information on this can be found in Chapter 8 of the Papa G. If a mitigation activity does not meet the criteria for public assistance funding, it may be eligible for funding under the HMGP program. As you engage in next steps to evaluate your damage and plan your project scope, your FEMA and HSEMD representative will discuss the potential for hazard mitigation activities with you. Our phase 3 of our applicant briefing will also talk about 406 mitigation a bit more in depth. FEMA reviews each project to ensure compliance with applicable environmental and historical preservation requirements. Additional information on EHP reviews and requirements can be found in the Papa G in Chapter 7A and Appendix A. Additionally, the Green Sheet provides disaster-specific guidance. This can be found on our website. HSEMD recommends that applicants review FEMA's special consideration questions, FEMA Form 009-0-12. This form is completed for each PA project and can assist applicants with identifying items related to the project that may require additional review by FEMA. We'll also go more in depth in our environmental and historical preservation requirements during phase 3 of our applicant briefing. Projects near waterways or floodplains require cooperative effort between the applicant and regulatory agency. Additional information on submitting a joint application through DNR's permit website can be found on the DNR website. FEMA does require a response from both DNR and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Improved project. The applicant may wish to make improvements to a damaged facility that are not required by eligible codes and standards. A project that restores the pre-disaster function of a facility and incorporates improvements or changes the pre-disaster design as an improved project. The applicant may determine that the public welfare is not best served by restoring the function of a damaged facility. When this occurs, the applicant must obtain FEMA's approval to apply PA funding towards a different facility or facilities. FEMA refers to this as an alternate project. Additional guidance can be found in Chapter 8 of the Papa G. If you are thinking that you might want to improve or use your funds for an alternate facility, please let your project officer know and they can help guide you through that process. Alternate procedures for permanent work under Section 428 of the Stafford Act is designed to achieve better recovery outcomes and simplify the delivery of assistance. FEMA caps federal funding based on the aggregate federal share of the approved estimated cost to restore the damaged facility to pre-disaster design and function in accordance with eligible codes and standards, and for cost-effective PA mitigation measures associated with the actual restoration scope of work that the applicant will perform. FEMA would complete a fixed cost estimate for all large permanent work projects and will send the fixed cost offer to the applicant for consideration. If the applicant accepts the offer, then FEMA considers it an alternative procedures project. If the offer is not accepted, they go through the standard procedures. And final funding will be based on actual costs. Additional information on this can be found in Chapter 8 and Appendix M of the Papa G. So far in Iowa, HSEMD has not found the alternate procedures of accepting a fixed cost offer beneficial to the applicant and feels that the benefits can be achieved by going through the standard process to request either an alternate or improved project instead. PA funding is aimed at restoring facilities based on pre-disaster design and function in conformity with current applicable codes, specifications, and standards. The purpose of consensus-based codes, specifications, and standards is to promote resiliency and reduce future risk in repair and replacement of damaged facilities funded under the PA program. FEMA policy FP-104-009-11 outlines the framework and requirements. Appendix A of this policy lists specific codes, specifications, and standards by facility type. Additional guidance on this can be found in Chapter 8 of the POPG. Multiple layers of government work in partnership to administer the PA program once a disaster has been declared. As the federal awarding agency, FEMA's primary responsibilities are to develop and issue program guidance and policies, award the prime PA disaster grant to the state, assist with the development and final approval of projects, and obligate funds. The state of Iowa is the recipient of the prime grant. As a pass-through entity, HSEMD works in partnership with FEMA to manage and administer the program in Iowa. HSEMD has a dedicated team of public assistance staff, and our staff support the administration of subawards, provide technical assistance, and monitor project progress and compliance. FEMA uses both the term applicant and subrecipient to identify the local partner. An applicant has applied for assistance under PA, while a subrecipient has received a subaward. The grant requirements for the prime award flow down to the subrecipient. Subrecipients are accountable for the compliant use of federal funds and completion of projects in compliance with the PA program policy, terms, conditions, and regulations. Documentation must be retained for at least 3 years from the day that your grant account with HSEMD is closed. We recommend organizing your documentation as if it were going to be audited. You'll want to establish a disaster-specific file to maintain documentation for each of your PA projects and include all supporting documentation for claimed costs. The Single Audit Act requires federal grant recipients who expend $750,000 or more in federal funds in a fiscal year must have a single audit performed. Common audit findings include missing or incomplete documentation, ineligible or unreasonable costs, procurement issues, funds being commingled or were not tracked separately in the accounting system. So as a final reminder, your next step is to request for public assistance on our EM Grants Pro system. If you're not sure if you'll have the right kind of damage, if you think you might be receiving insurance funds, but you're not sure when or how much, we encourage you to submit an RPA. We can always withdraw you from the PA program later on in the process if you find that you don't have anything eligible. Some additional resources for you. On FEMA's website, you can find PA policy, guidance, and fact sheets. You can find additional guidance on procurement, and there is tons of PA on-demand training. FEMA's HMGP program also provides funding for eligible mitigation measures that reduce disaster losses. HSEMD is a pass-through entity for the HMGP program in Iowa. More information can be found on our website or by contacting Dusty Pagones, HSEMD's Mitigation Bureau Chief. FEMA's Community Disaster Loan program is available to local governments adversely affected by major disasters. Funds can be used to carry on existing essential municipal services or to expand such essential functions to meet disaster-related needs. Loans have an initial term of 5 years and can be extended to 10 years. The State of Iowa Contingent Fund is designed to meet disaster-related necessary expenses or serious needs through a loan. Funding cannot exceed $1 million per fiscal year and has a 20-year repayment schedule with no interest. This fund is administered by HSEMD. For more information on either of these programs, please contact Mark Newhall. SBA provides low-interest disaster loans to help businesses and homeowners recover from declared disasters. Additional information can be found on SBA's website. Through the CDBG disaster program, HUD provides flexible grants to help cities, counties, and states recover from presidentially declared disasters. The Iowa Economic Development Authority is the pass-through agency, and more information can be found on their website. The U.S. Department of Labor provides national dislocated workers grants to provide funding to create temporary employment opportunities to assist with cleanup and recovery efforts. Iowa Workforce Development is the pass-through agency, and additional information can be found on their website. FHWA's Emergency Relief Program helps communities hurt by natural disasters and catastrophic events provide funding to repair damaged roads and bridges. Generally, this includes interstates, freeways, and major collector roads. Iowa Department of Transportation is a pass-through entity for the state of Iowa, and additional information can be found on their website. USDA's Farm Service Agency offers a variety of programs to help farmers, communities, and businesses that have been hard hit by natural disaster events. These programs include livestock assistance, farm loans, farmland damage, and crop loss assistance. Additional information can also be found on their website. Any questions? I'll end this for a second. Anybody have any questions? All right. We're going to be hearing from Dan Schmitz about our HMGP program a little bit as well. Dan, are you ready?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. I'll go ahead and start your presentation. All right. Whoops.
Okay.
There we go.
We go. I just want to make sure. I don't think I can move the slides, so somebody might have to move those for me.
Yeah, I'll move them for you.
Basically, what we're going to talk about today is there are 3 programs through the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program. The first one here is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, that the funds become available when there is declared disaster in the state, which has just happened. Funds are open and available statewide for all counties, all cities. Projects that reduce or eliminate future damages from natural disasters. And on the bottom of the slide here, that is the funding source for the program. And it's available to states, tribes, local agencies, certain nonprofits, to do work to reduce those damages from the natural disasters. Okay, I think next slide. This slide simply goes over the regulations, the policies that we follow through the programs to stay in line with all regulations. Next slide. This is a requirement for all projects. What it basically says and summarizes that to be eligible, you have to follow the DMA 2000 requirements and have a hazard mitigation plan approved in your county to be eligible for funds. The specific project that you are looking at doing has to be identified in that plan. It has to be approved by FEMA to be able to be an eligible project type. And that is one of the major requirements for all projects for this funding source. Next slide. Okay. This slide summarizes for this disaster. There's an estimated $1.2 million available to do projects. Again, that's statewide for all communities, cities, counties, school districts that are eligible to submit requests for. That's underneath the hazard mitigation program. The bottom is the typical cost share. So at your local level, you would have a 15% cost share for your project. So if you had a $100,000 project, you would have to come up with 15% of that $100,000 to pay your local share. Next slide. for the hazard mitigation grant program, or just some of the priorities which we look at as a state, and we prioritize those, the different types of projects, depending on what they might be. We, as the state of Iowa, we manage the program, and we deal with and take care of all the funding through the program. And again, this county and city has to have a mitigation plan. The state of Iowa also has to have an administrative plan as to how we are going to manage the program. Next slide. This slide identifies our priorities that we have set as a state of Iowa to reduce or eliminate damages as much as possible. The priority number one is property acquisitions, hardening electrical utilities, doing flood protection, warning sirens against. These all are to help reduce or eliminate hazards. Second priority comes up with wastewater stations and backup power generations. And the third priority, as we can read, is safe rooms and small flood barriers. Next slide. And this slide is a quick summary of how projects are ranked and they're selected. Every project request that we get through gets evaluated as to, again, what they might be. That's in relationship like the previous slide. They're also looked at, like in this particular case, it's $1.2 million for the entire funding source. So that's going to come into play, is the amount of funds that are available and what your project is going to cost. Is it going to fit within the funding available? Is your project affecting populations? How much? How many? Looked at the benefits towards the cost. In most projects, we have to do a benefit cost analysis on the project, and the projects are looked at in relationship to each other as to what is the cost of the project and what are the benefits that you're going to receive. Next slide. Okay. This is a basic timeline of events for the HMGP program. The first 12 months, you get the disaster declaration, and then we receive notice of funds availabilities. That is when you, as the city or the county or the sub-applicant, goes into our online system and submits a request or notice that you have an interest for funding for a project. That is one of the steps that falls in line in that time frame. Developing the application, and then we submit the applications. That is typically done within the first 12 months. So depending on what type of application you may have to do, if you have to do engineering, architectural work, designs, that may take a while. So you may or may not be able to get it in this disaster, but there would be different funding sources that they would possibly fall under, and we'll touch base on that in a little bit. And then at the last time frames of disaster, usually they're about 4 years. You have 1 year to get the application in, and then you have up to 3 years without an extension to get all the work done. So again, the last 36 months of that 4 years is usually complete scope of work, getting all the reimbursements done, getting everything closed out and sent to FEMA. Next slide. Here's a few bullet points that you might want to consider. And the top one says, consider public assistance, what you just heard about before. Because if you can get the work done there, as you've seen in one of the previous slides, this program, HMGP, has $1.2 million available. And that's statewide. And that's not a lot of funding to go around. So if you can get it done within the public assistance program, that might be a better recommendation. HMGP is again competitive because we're looking at different ranking criteria and different circumstances of which project we might get more benefit out of. So we'll be looking at different types of projects and how they're going to rank and be more beneficial. Might be. With the HMGP program, we will not know the final funding amount until 12 months into that, after that disaster was declared. So that 1.2 million is basically an estimate right now. And once all the damage assessments are reviewed and finalized with FEMA and on the PA side, we will have an estimate, a final estimate of what our funding will be. So until that time frame comes around, we're basically using the estimates that we initially received to be able to submit projects. The last bullet comment comes into in-kind services. So many communities do not have the local 15% in-kind match. So you do have the opportunity to do in-kind services to use for that match. You would need to keep documentation of the work and everything that was done, time cards, time that spent on everything, to be able to submit against that to show that it was done in relationship to that particular project. Next slide. Okay. These are two other funding sources. We just chatted about, that was the HMGP, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. That's when there's a declared disaster in the state. These two are annual funding sources. The BRIC program, the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, is annual funding source, usually comes out, notice, September timeframe. And it has similar project types than HMGP does. The state typically gets an allocation of funds, and then everything else is competitive nationwide. So with the BRIC program, you're not competing statewide like with HMGP, you're competing nationwide. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Program is particularly related towards flood type projects and to reduce claims against the NFIP program. So that gets a little bit more streamlined into what is available and what you can do with those funds. And typically, as the bottom bullet says, it's 75, 10, 15% cost share. So 15% of that cost share would be at the local level, which whether local would be a county, city, school district, or whatever it might be. Next slide. Okay, what we're going to show here are some pictures of different types of projects, so you have a visual of what we're chatting about. And the biggest hazard we have here in the state of Iowa is typically flooding, which this slide shows here from a newspaper clipping. As you can see, there's a house in the background, and there's probably, 2 foot of water there. So next slide. Yeah, this slide also shows, in relationship to the previous slide, of properties that are in floodplains. This slide here shows three, four, five residential properties here that are built right on the river. And typically what happens when that water filters into the river elevates, and then those homes get flooded. So next slide. So to resolve that issue, what we do is we purchase those properties that are in that floodplain, and see here, if the water would overgo those banks, it would not damage those houses anymore, or whatever those buildings be. Next slide. This is a photo of a big water pollution facility in Cedar Rapids, and it's particularly back in 2008 with all the flooding and rainfall we had. This facility was inundated with water and completely flooded out. If you go to the next slide, see on the bottom and the right hand sides of the photo, there's a yellow earthen berm that was built to protect that facility against flooding. So that was another project type that can be done to protect against the flooding. The initial one we showed was removing those facilities, those buildings out of the floodplain. In this case, that's not reasonable to do that to this type of a facility. So a berm was placed around it to protect it against that flooding source. Next slide. This is another photo of berms around a facility. You can see on the top, it says flood wall that was built around the facility. And on the bottom part of the slide, you can see where it wasn't, and it was completely, those areas were completely inundated. Next slide. This is another project type. On the top, it shows where there was sandbagging done to protect this facility against that flooding. On the bottom, in 2014, a year later, that facility was moved to a higher elevation. So instead of removing it completely out like we did in those photos with the properties, this facility was moved to a different location. Next slide. All right, this slide again, we're talking about flooding because this is one of the major issues within the state of Iowa here. This photo shows a big detention basin that was constructed to draw those water sources, those flooding sources into this area to remove it from other critical facilities, residential areas, whatever it might be, and eliminate areas and detain that water in this big basin here. Next slide. Okay, this is a photo of power lines that have been affected by ice and wind. As you can see, they're sagging to the point of breaking. And this happens fairly common here in Iowa. And we've done power lines, building heavier gauge, putting heavier gauge lines in them, heavier poles, moving those poles closer together. It's typically a project done by an electrical utility company. Next slide. Okay. This again is a photo of those poles. The pole on the right-hand side is on the original line, where you can see the weight of the ice and the buildup on that had sagged those power lines and bent that pole. So what we've done is gone in here and put heavier gauge pole in. That line will eventually be relocated and probably new line put in, a heavier gauge line. Next slide. Warning sirens. Warning sirens, and one of the next slides will also be generators, have been very, very popular in the last 2 or 3 years. There's much smaller dollar project than the other ones. These are usually 30, 40 to $50,000, depending on the size of the siren or the generator. So they've been much more affordable by communities, especially smaller communities, than the multi-million-dollar projects. Warning sirens are self-explanatory. They provide warning against high wind events, tornadoes. The backup generators provide the backup power for critical facilities, warming and cooling shelters for cities. Meaning if you had power out 2 or 3 days, which has happened here and would be able to have a facility that would have backup power so that residents could go into those facilities and get warm, get a meal, get health care, whatever they might need. But that generator would provide that power for that facility. We do a lot of them for water plants, sewer plants, power plants, whatever that might need that backup power. Because as with one of the previous slides, that the power lines break, that line is no longer there, that power source is no longer there. The generator provides that backup power. Next slide. Okay, this slide is a photo of a safe room. It's hard to tell in this photo that it is, but it's a new facility or a school, and the walls are typically 18 to 20 inches thick of concrete to remove the chances of that facility being impaled, collapsed by a tornado or a high wind event. They're typically fairly expensive because of the construction, the extra materials that are going to come into play to build the facility. But we've done quite a few of those in the past. These can also be done in parks. We've done quite a few of them in parks where they have a smaller building that might be 20 foot by 20 foot, that allows parks people, campers, to go in. If the tornado comes up all the expected, they can go into that facility and take cover and get out of the high wind events. And the final slide, I think. Okay, this slide is simply to our websites, where to go on and submit that notice of interest. If you have an interest in a project or looking at doing a project, you'll submit it on the websites, and then somebody will get back with you to do some more question and answering, gathering, to determine what you're looking at doing and provide you the best feedback and guidance that we can. And Steve and Matt are the 2 point of contacts for the program. And get a hold of them on their emails, and then they will disseminate the information or your question down to somebody else that can get with you. But if you're looking to doing a project, those 2 individuals and will be the ones you'd want to contact to find out more information. And I think we're done with the HMA slides.
Thanks, Dan. Does anybody have any questions either about PA or HMGP? All right, so I will follow up with an email with a copy of the slides and some additional resources for our applicants, and we will hold phase 2 and 3 of our applicant briefings virtually. You'll be invited to those later once our RPA deadline has passed. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or one of our project officers. Thanks, and have a good rest of your day.